All right, welcome to continuing on with the thematic classification. So this first objective, or 6.3, is looking at the supervised classifications and applying them to a multispectral image. So I'm just going to give you the methodologies here. You're going to see this as well when you get to the lab, and you're going to see it in action with Envy in the video for that. So here's the methodology. So first of all, open your image with all the transformations that you have completed. So have those transformations available. Decide how many and what classes are required for your final product. By the way, these transformations are going to be layer stacked, so you should have them layer stacked into your image before you do this. If you haven't done that, you're going to have to do that first. So layer stack, take your resize stack, and you're going to include the transformation. So you should have NDVI and PCA for sure. And if you have TCA, you should also have that one. So those need to be all combined into one big database. Then you can open it, and that's your database with all of that. Then you're going to decide on how many classes you have in your image based on land cover types. And then you're going to draw in your regions of interest or training areas for each class. Now, in Envy, they refer to them as training areas or polygons. And then you actually convert it into regions of interest. And there's a weird, funky step in the middle that doesn't make any sense to anybody, but you have to do it. So you can just follow me in my video, and you'll be like, why did I just do that? And it'll be like, I know this is a case. But so you're going to draw them in, and just by like creating the polygon, and then you always want 10 training areas for each class, and keep them about the same size as well. So I know rivers are really hard because they're really narrow. Just make it a really long training area. Then you're going to choose the classification algorithm that you want to do, and then you're going to process it. So once you hit process, then it's going to come up with a screen that says, hey, do you want to clean it up? And you're going to say, yes, I want to clean it up because it's really noisy, because it doesn't look like cartoony. So there's two options. There's smoothing and aggregation. So smoothing, it filters it. It takes basically a median filter, and it takes the average class that's there and then removes the random pixels that are within that area. So you can set the size of that. So you can say you want a 3x3, 5x5, 7x7, 9x9, and the bigger you get, the more bubbly or like bigger bubbles you get of each class. So if you are going to smooth, I suggest keeping the smoothing small because otherwise it starts distorting the image. Aggregation is kind of the same idea, except that it tries to group pixels of like value. So if it doesn't meet the number that you put in, let's say you say 9, and there's only 3 pixels that are like attached, then it will just kind of go over them with another class. It'll get rid of that grouping of that particular class. So it does also make it a little bit more cartoony looking or bubbly looking. It just gets rid of those like speckles of like little groups of pixels. So again, you can adjust that to whatever size you like, but so there has to be a minimum met of the pixels in the area. So here's a few examples. Now I've only gone through a few supervised classification options for the supervised classification. So we talked about parallel piped, we talked about minimum distance. The only one that doesn't have here is the maximum likelihood. But if you look at D, we have minimum distance here. And then we have the parallel piped, which is G, which is down here. So you can see from between the two of them, D does not have any black pixels, so it's all classified within here, the red, yellow, green, or blue and green. But if you go down to G, you can start seeing black, and that's the unclassified classes that have been identified in there. Let's see, binary encoding decision tree. Mahalanobis distance, you'll also see that in Envy. You're certainly welcome to give that one a try. And so you can see here with C, that one would be, you can see actually how it's almost more, it's more sensitive to something going on there. It has a purple. So it has a little bit of this unclassified class, but I think there's another type of landform in there that maybe you want to investigate. So that that is the difference between all of these. All of these are supervised classification options. So you can see how very different your result looks depending on which algorithm you choose. And so for those of you who are worried about accuracy, this kind of comes to show you that accuracy is all dependent on what you do. So especially look at this yellow area. Like, I mean, this is so different for every single one of these. If I give my client a result, I need to tell them what algorithm I used. Because if this is the image that they were expecting, and this is the image that you give them, they're going to really wonder what you were doing. Or even if this is the image you give them and this is what they're expecting, you can see a very big difference between the two of them. So that you need to be very clear in any, like if you have a figure number, always state what algorithm you chose when you did that. So the algorithms are really, really important to choose. So I'm going to jump into Objective 6.4 as well, because this is applying a unsupervised classification. So let's go through the methodology for this one. So first of all, you decide which algorithm you want to use. Is it ISODATA or is it KMeans? And then you determine the maximum or true number of the classes that you want to have. So how many classes? You put in like 10. Because you looked at your image and you're like, yes, there are 10 classes that I can identify. Then you run it. And then you clean it up just like in supervised classification with aggregation and filtering. And then it finishes, and then you go and you change the names of the classes to match Anderson land cover classification. So at the end, you're guessing, you're trying to figure out what did the computer tell you is what. So that's again, before you say it is this, now you are trying to figure out what the computer did. So this is the PDF copy of Anderson land cover classification to go to. On page 8, that's where it is. So here's an example of the two. So we're looking at burn scars in an area, so that's what the black is. The black is not unclassified. And in fact, it's very rare that you see unclassified with either of these, but it can happen. So it says the bottom left is ISODATA and bottom right is KMeans. So these ones are supervised. So you can see again the big difference between the ISODATA and the KMeans, right? So your results look very different, and even up here compared to these ones. So again, this is why it's so important to state which one you used, and then you're going to also have to do an accuracy assessment. So let's just compare supervised with unsupervised for a moment. So here is an example of supervised versus unsupervised. See this white area here in unsupervised, very well defined here and not defined at all here. This white area is defined. This is not at all there, doesn't even exist. There's very little white in the supervised classification, but this area in here, which is a water body, seems to be better defined than what this one is over here. So which one is more accurate? Well, the only way that we can determine the accuracy of these is through something called a confusion matrix. And even with that, the confusion matrix, if you have ground truth data, you can use that to do the unsupervised classification. But the accuracy of a supervised classification is all done through the confusion matrix itself with the training areas. So that is that's kind of covering the difference between supervised algorithms, unsupervised algorithms, and how to do them. And then the next video will cover confusion matrices.